Well, these protests that we've been seeing in Brazil have been on such a scale that they've really given the president of the country plenty to think about. What can she do that will alleviate the anger and the tension that we're seeing on the streets? We're going to be live in London and also with guests in Rio. And if you are Brazilian, whether you're in the country or outside, how can you help us understand what's happening in your country? This is how you can phone us up. We're live here on the BBC. We're also on social media, all the places you'd expect: Twitter, Facebook and Google Plus too.
People are going to want to know.
Let me say something.
If you're watching in Brazil and would prefer to Skype us, we're on BBC_WHYS. Now, just before I introduce you to our first few guests, have a look at this video. Some of you will have seen it before because this is a Vine that was posted up of the protests, and that's not it at the moment. I'll show you that to you. Here we go, and there are some images. Doesn't look like we can pull that up, but there was a Vine that was being pushed around on Twitter a great deal, a 6-minute video which showed the scale of the protests in Rio. I'll bring that up for you just as soon as we've sorted out those technical problems. In the meantime, let me introduce you to our first few guests. We've got in Rio, Bernardo and João, also live from Rio. We've got Nicole, who is a blogger and journalist, and in London, Mariana, an artist from Brasilia who's living here at the moment. Well, João and Bernardo, you were protesting in Rio last night. Tell us what you saw.
Well, we arrived close to when the confusion started to begin. So most of the time we were in the front line of the protests, receiving a lot of tear gas and rubber bullets and helping people to get out. A lot of people that were only peaceful during the whole protest were still being treated like they were vandalizing the whole town. It was very hard and difficult for people to get out of there. They chased everybody far away from the protest.
What about you, Nicole? Did you protest?
And I got off at Uruguaiana, and things were relatively calm there. I think the scary thing, but not in a bad way, really. The scary thing was that there were so many people. I mean, I know that the press has said it was only 300,000, but I would guess there were at least 1 million there. So it was really peaceful, and I got a message saying that things started going bad, so I got out early. But loads of my friends got tear gassed, pepper sprayed. They said that they were cornered. So I mean, I think it started peaceful, and the majority of the people were being peaceful. But you know, it did escalate quite quickly. So yeah.
And Bernardo and João, how does it work? Have you all got your phones and you're all communicating with other protesters on Twitter and Facebook and so on?
Well, actually, I think that the Brazilian cell phone infrastructure simply can't work out with that many people around. So all the phone lines, mobile phone lines, mobile internet was off. So you could not talk to anyone outside of there. But were really small gaps that you could access something.
Well, all three of you, it's very good to talk to you. Mariana, I'll get to you in just a moment. But first of all, lots of people have been getting in touch with the BBC, sending us videos of things that they've seen and of their opinions as well. Let's just have a look at a number of them which we've mixed together for you.
Um ato de apoio aos protestos que vem ocorrendo no Brasil aconteceu ontem, no Parque Millennium, na área leste de Chicago. Às cerca das 7 horas da tarde, 100 manifestantes se reuniram com bandeiras e cartazes. A manifestação foi pacífica e silenciosa para não desrespeitar as normas do parque.
Well, thanks to those of you who helped us put that together. That was featuring Sao Paulo, Chicago, Porto Alegre and Brasilia. And in fact, Mariana, you're from Brasilia. Have you been supporting the protesters from afar?
Yeah, well, I've been trying to follow everything through my friends posting Facebook. And by the minute, things are changing. The latest that I heard is that the Free Pass movement is starting to not continue the manifestations, as it seems that as it grown, they take into a different level, having undercover cops and people trying to turn into a violent manifestation and taking the focus off the real issues, which is corruption. So I'm trying to follow everything, but every 5 minutes something happens.
Well, if it happens in this hour, don't worry, we'll pass it on. And Bernardo and João, did you see any protesters being violent?
Well, actually, always there are some people being violent, but they would be with or without the police. The main violence issue we saw was in response to police violence. There were a lot of peaceful people that or otherwise would not get in confrontations, would not vandalize anything, that were so pissed off that they could not stop and halt their actions.
So you're saying that the violence was prompted by the police, but one moment, Nicole, I saw pictures of shops being looted, of fires being lit. I mean, the police didn't force the protesters to do that.
No, I think that there are a few vandals who are taking advantage of the situation, definitely. But I think that as it escalates, the police are a bit more violent than they probably should be. And they probably were getting peaceful protesters as opposed to the people who were actually doing the crimes. I do think that with that number of people, there will always be people that will take advantage of the situation because the police doesn't have that much control over it, and they are there to to steal things and do things like that. And I also think that even though they are vandals, you can see how angry they are at the government. So I don't condone it, of course, but it's it's something that if you really think about things that Brazilians go through every day, you might be able to understand.
Thank you very much for the moment. Those of you watching, I'm wondering if you have any sort of sympathy for people who are lighting fires or creating some sort of vandalism in the name of these protests. Do you think their frustrations perhaps do justify that kind of actions, or should these protesters remain peaceful at all times? By all means, get us on the WHYS hashtag. I'm going to pull up a comment in just a moment. First of all, Bruno's with us from BBC Brazil. Actually, while the comment's here, I'll read it to you. I find these protests rather puzzling. Is this just a large-scale Occupy-type protest? If so, it will probably fizzle out in the same way. Well, I guess we're still learning about that, aren't we, Bruno? But what's been interesting is that these protests have evolved in the last week.
Yes, they've changed their nature completely, which started off, as your guest said, as a protest defending the decrease in public fares, spiked into something way bigger, and loads of grievances are being expressed by the protesters. But now it just might be that it has taken a turn for the worst, that the mood is becoming increasingly aggressive. That's what it seems. It might not be the majority, but still, if a significant minority takes part in actions like these, like setting things alight and destroying public property, it manages to tarnish the whole movement as a whole. So it is a risk, I think, even to the other protesters. The other protesters are already saying that they have to clean up the movement in order so that these people don't tarnish the whole thing. And there are those who are saying on social media, we've seen a lot of that in our own BBC's Brazil's Facebook and Twitter accounts, that they're also calling for people to get back home, to go back home, because now the moods are too, people are getting too feisty, and its tension might become a bit bigger.
Bruno, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in a moment. Just at the beginning of the programme, I was telling you about this Vine, which has very much been pushed around a great deal by hundreds of thousands of people. Vine, if you haven't used it, is a video app which takes 6-second videos. So very easy to push around on social media. This is just one that was seen by a lot of people. Let's pull it up. It was by Lucio Amorim, who's a marketing consultant, and once again it's failed. It does work online though, so have a look for it. Either way, what it shows is the scale of the number of people who are protesting in Rio, which leads me, Nicole, to ask you, will you be going out tonight? Do you think there will be another huge protest tonight?
I don't think tonight there will be a protest. Well, they are popping up everywhere, really, but I think a massive movement will be happening on Monday. I think they've chosen Monday and Thursdays to do big movements in the center of the city. So I don't think I will be going out today. But for example, when there are games in Maracanã, they usually go out and protest there. And I think the police is taking measures to completely surround the stadium and not let anyone who doesn't have a ticket past their line. So I think it's still gonna go on. There will be big protests. I think the violence of the police are making people even angrier.
What about you, Bernardo João? Are you planning to protest later on today?
Not today. We're already scheduling our protest agenda to start again on Monday. Hopping on the bandwagon, I don't know.
Monday is going to be a big one in Rio, and Tuesday we have another big one in Niterói, that is a neighborhood city of Rio.
Okay, so the protests are still planned for the final week of the Confederations Cup. Just one word from you, Bruno, at BBC Brazil. I know there's been this emergency cabinet meeting. Are we expecting to hear from the president in the next hour or two?
Well, we don't know yet when she's going to speak to the nation, but it will have to be a very decisive speech on her part. That's what people are expecting. Some are calling for her to announce a more ambitious political reform. That has been in the agenda for quite a while, but it has been postponed. That political reform would involve perhaps a more transparent financing of campaign and even cutting down on some fringe parties which are only there to compose alliances. So people think that would be an important first step. It would be a bold move from the part of President Dilma Rousseff, but we don't know exactly what will be the exact terms of what she'll say. She might be a bit cautious. Next year is an election year, so she's going to tread very carefully as well. That's also a likelihood.
Thank you very much indeed. I can see Arthur on Twitter saying to stop this, the president needs to cut costs on transport and listen to the cause of the masses. Well, we'll see what she has to say in the next few hours. Hasib in Pakistan, thanks for watching, Hasib. He says, I totally agree with the protesters. The young people have had enough. It's about their lives and their futures. Well, after we've taken a short break, we're going to get into not so much what happened at the protest, but what the protesters want, what the government could do to take away some of the frustration that they feel. Stay with us. We're on the WHYS hashtag.
No, I actually talking about it. Let me say something. No, I actually talking about it. Let me say something.
Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. It'll come as no surprise that we're talking about Brazil today. All week long, we've seen protests there bigger than anything in the last 2 decades. And of course, it's coinciding with the Confederations Cup. This is a tournament, a trial run, if you like, for the World Cup next year in Brazil. I doubt it's what the people organising it had in mind. Now, lots of people in Brazil have been uploading videos to the BBC to tell us about their views and experiences of the protest. Let's just have a look at one of them that's been posted at worldhaveyoursay.com.
I'm 28 years old. I am born and raised in Rio, and I'm here to give you feedback about why we are doing this revolution. First of all, we are tired of so many lies about anything. The government talks about education, there's no education. The government talks about security, and in Rio, 1,000 people get killed by a year, gunshots. And the government talks about healthcare, and I see people dying waiting for a doctor. The government talks about dreaming of having a new home, but the cost of living is so high.
Bruno, thank you very much indeed. By the way, if you're watching in Brazil and would like to send your own video, worldhaveyoursay.com is where you can do it. So let's talk about what the protesters actually want. Live with us from Porto Alegre, we have Federico, who's a product manager. Nicole's still with us from Rio. She's a blogger and journalist. And at the BBC Sao Paulo Bureau, we have Newton, the project manager, who I spoke to earlier on BBC World Service Radio. Well, Newton, let me start with you. Good to speak to you again. What is it that you want the government to do?
Hi, Ross. I think I would like to see the government change their approach on this. They should not expect that people will react the same way they have been reacting till now. What people really want, what we really want, is to see the government sitting on the table and discussing the big matters, what really matters for us right now.
Federico, what about you?
I want peace, really. I want peace. I went to the streets last night, and unfortunately, I was shot by the police, you know, gas bombs, tear bombs. And it was sad. We weren't doing anything violent, but the police came towards us and attacked us because they feared that we were going to destroy the local TV station. You know, we were judged before doing anything wrong. And now FIFA is saying that they want the government to stop this rebellion, you know, this movement. And all I want is peace right now. Peace, because with peace we are able to say what we think. We can negotiate. We can search together for solutions, because we have a lot of problems and we need solutions. And well, that's it, man.
But Federico, I understand that you want the way that the protests are policed to change. That's a short-term goal, but what's your long-term ambition? What do you want the government to change in order for you to stop protesting?
Wow, I want so many things, you know. I will never stop protesting. I am an active man. I'm alive, you know. This is democracy. We have to keep always saying what we think, you know, and protest may be a wrong, not a very good word for it, but well, it's the way we have right now. It's what fits, right? But my main worries are about health and education. We need both to strive as a country. We need education because we need better doctors. We need people that knows the difference between right and wrong. You know, what's morally correct and not. How to work, how to create things, new things. We need entrepreneurs and health, of course. We pay a lot of money to service private service health service. Health providers.
Mm-hmm.
My family, we spend £1,000 a month with health care, and it's a lot of money.
So it sounds like you've got frustrations across the board, and in fact, we've heard this from a lot of protesters saying this isn't a small thing, we're looking for a societal change. Nicole, what about you? Are there particular things the government could do immediately which would alleviate your frustration?
Definitely. I went to the protest on Monday, and there was someone who had a poster that said, "There are so many things I want to protest about. It doesn't fit in this poster." So I think that completely sums up what we're talking about. It's corruption. It's lack of transparency. It's this man I met yesterday whose dad was in line to be treated by public health, and he had been waiting for 6 years. You know, it's the reports that we see on TV saying that hundreds of ambulances aren't being used. They're simply being abandoned because they don't have money to use them. It's the fact that the monthly salary of public school teachers are £240. It's everything. It's everything.
So it sounds like it's about the way that the system works, in particular with reference to the delivery of public services. Let me just pull up a comment to show all of you. This is from Celio, posting on the New York Times website. And let's just show you this quickly. We pay high taxes, they build modern stadiums with our money, and forget that society needs to live in good conditions. And really that echoes one of the things that Taku is saying from Zimbabwe on our Facebook page. I think the Brazilians all along have been looking for a perfect opportunity to voice their concerns. With the World Cup coming, this is the perfect opportunity. Is that how it feels, Newton, that the World Cup is a chance for the world to see your frustration?
Absolutely. I think the timing is perfect. We started this with the Confederation Cup, but we know that we still have World Cup coming 2014, and we have Olympics. So the time to talk is now. I would like to add something that has been discussed a lot, but I think it's the time to discuss the cost of Brazil. It's really challenging to run a business in Brazil because of the government's regulation, fiscal regulations. And I think if we manage to do that, we will be able to attract investments and, as a consequence, in improving healthcare conditions and education conditions.
So you want to change the situation in which businesses operate. Let me just stick to this World Cup point because it's an interesting one. Frederico, do you still want Brazil to host the World Cup?
No, I don't want it, really. I don't want it. You know, we need to make a stand. We need to say, this is not right, and we're going to change things. And meanwhile, don't come to Brazil. Okay, only if you're going to do business here. You know, it's not for the World Cup. And by the way, I would like to say to Milton that I disagree, man. I have a business. I'm a businessman. My family owns several companies, and it's not so hard to have a business here. And it's not wrong to disagree, but you see, we disagree in small things and even in great things. So this whole movement is still a mess. We need more direction and we need leadership, but a good leadership, not a bad one. I was walking on the streets yesterday and I didn't know where I was going. I asked a friend, man, where are we going? He said, I don't know. And I didn't know either. So who's leading this, man? I want to get to know these leaders. I'm definitely not a leader. I'm just a regular guy, an everyday normal guy. So
well,
we need leadership.
Frederico, you mentioned the point of leadership. Nicole, does it matter? Because some people think that actually having no leaders gives it strength.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up, actually. There's a lot of people saying that they'd rather it be non-partisan. There's a lot of people, I mean, the organizers themselves have said, you know, we need no leadership. The people is the people. The power is to the people, that we don't need leadership. But I think that's a really naive idea, because it doesn't work if you don't have a leader. Otherwise, it's going to be all scattered forever, and it's not going to work. And I think that it's what Frederico said. I think that's his name. It's what he said. We agree on the bigger points. We just don't agree on the smaller ones. So if there was leadership, maybe we could, talk about that stuff and come out with actual goals.
But isn't the problem at the moment, Newton, that it's such a broad protest movement, you can object to anything and be involved? If there's a leader, suddenly some people will enjoy the situation, but others will feel the leader doesn't represent them.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the tricky part of it. We want a leader, but we don't need a leader that is going to represent something that we do want to see happening again. So if one side doesn't have if we don't have a leader, it's a good thing. It can be tricky in the future, but who is going to be this leader? Is that a big question right now?
Well, that is a big question. I wonder if anyone watching can help us. We're going to come back and carry on talking with Nicole, Newton, Frederico. Thank you very much indeed. If you are in any way involved in the protest movement in Brazil, do you think you need a leader? And if you do, I wonder who you think it ought to be. If you're on Facebook, you can get us at facebook.com/World Have Your Say. We're also on Twitter. The hashtag is WHYS. World Have Your Say is live here on the BBC. We'll be with you for the next 20 minutes.
Let me say something.
Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're talking about Brazil. We've seen protests there, the like of which that haven't taken place for over 2 decades. 1 million people turned out yesterday in 100 Brazilian cities, complaining about a whole raft of different issues, as we've been hearing. Now, the president's cancelled a trip to Japan. She's holding an emergency cabinet meeting today. And one of the big issues is, what should she do? What should she offer the protesters as a reason to not take to the streets? Now, do remember, we're live here on the BBC. If you've got views on what she should do now, let us know. All the usual contacts apply.
Talking about it.
I experienced.
This is chaos. People are going to want to know. Let me say something.
Well, I was talking about President Rousseff. Let's have a look at a little of what she's been saying about the protests and how she might respond.
The government and society knows that all violence is destructive. Sadly, it only generates violence. We cannot accept this. However, this does not detract from the peaceful spirit of those who were out on the streets to demand their democratic rights. These people must be heard. This was apparent. This transcends the mechanisms of the traditional political parties, class, and the press.
So this President Rousseff. Well, we still have Newton live with us from Sao Paulo. We've got Mariano from Brasilia, but in London at the moment. And joining us from Sao Paulo as well is Daniel, who is a lawyer. Daniel, let me start with you. Do you have faith that your president is capable of responding adequately to these protests?
Well, at this point, I don't know, but certainly she has the power to do so. We'll see what's going to happen within the next hours. So
you're going to say wait and see. Mariana, what about you?
I hope she does, because she's the spokesperson for the people. But the problem, like I have as a Brazilian living abroad, is that every time I go back to Brazil, things are more expensive, and you don't see where the money goes. And I think that's the underlying problem amongst all these flags we try to raise. So I hope she stands up for the people who put her as a president, which is most of us in peace protesting.
It's interesting you mentioned the cost of things. Inflation has been mentioned by several people contacting the BBC. Newton, what about you? Talk to us about your leader. Do you think she's capable of responding properly to this protest?
Well, I do think she's capable of. The challenge is if she'll be able to manage all the parties' interests involved in politicians in Brazil. So she is capable of. We will have to wait and see if she'll be able to manage all forces involved, all leaderships involved. They are not part of this movement anymore.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you three in a moment. It was interesting, wasn't it, in that clip that we played of the president when she said, well, what's happening at the moment goes outside of the normal political systems, but we respect that and should listen to that. Well, not everyone is so accepting of that alternative political process. This is Basil posting on the Huffington Post website on just this issue. They are a sinister and destructive alternative to the use of constitutional or established channels of communication and the framework of law and order. And I suppose the point is, Daniel, here, that protesters could have voted for different candidates in the elections. They could make their displeasure known in ways that don't involve disrupting the country to this extent.
Yeah, well, that's, like I said, it's a difficult issue. People just, at this point, I think they don't trust political bodies anymore. There's this weird feeling right now going on, and suddenly nobody trusts. Well, people just don't trust the traditional institutions anymore. So something new is going on, and we are not exactly sure what's going on yet. To be very honest, this is a totally new process here. So I don't think we can actually say what's going to be next right now at this moment.
I think we'd all agree with that point you made, that we're not quite sure what's going on. Certainly at the moment, everyone is not quite sure what will come next. And certainly, looking at the reaction coming into the BBC, people were surprised at the scale of the protests yesterday. Newton, what about you? Do you feel that if people have points to make, they should do it through the political system?
Well, I do agree with Daniel that this is brand new for us. It's a beginning of a learning process. So they know that they cannot have a voice through the traditional political system. So that's why they start to use social media as a way to be organized. So I think this is the first step. Now let's see how the government reacts and how the government will open the conversation. But we know we cannot do that through the political system.
Mariano?
Hello.
What about your thought on the political system and whether the protesters should be working through that rather than bypassing it?
Well, if all the politicians, once they are elected, did half of what they promised to be elected, then I think we can start to talk. But that doesn't happen. So I get stuck on that point.
Thank you very much indeed. And I was talking to Bruno from BBC Brazil, who was on the programme a little bit earlier, much earlier in the day on BBC World Service Radio. And he was saying what's interesting is that actually these protests aren't always anti-government. They're actually anti-politics. People don't want the opposition parties taking any involvement in the protests any more than they do the ruling parties. Now, I want to show you a video from a woman called Carla. She's in Los Angeles, but she's Brazilian. You might well have seen this already because it's been pushed around an awful lot, watched hundreds of thousands of times. This is Carla, and we're going to speak to her live in a moment. This is Carla explaining why she's not going to the World Cup.
That's more than the last 3 World Cups added together. They added up to about 25 billions. Now tell me, in a country where illiteracy can reach 21% and averages 10%, a country that ranks 85 in the Human Development Index, a country where 13 million of people are underfed every day, and where many, many other people die waiting for medical treatment. Does that country need more stadiums?
Well, there was Carla, and as you can see on the screens here, she's live with us. Carla, it looked like you had access to some serious TV production set up there.
Yeah. I did. It was surprising.
Tell us why you made the video and what you've made of the reaction to it.
Well, I had the idea for the video before the protest started. I wanted to show the world what the side of Brazil that they didn't know. We all know about samba, carnival, but we don't know about what's really going on. And I felt that it would be a way to help bring attention to certain issues that we really had to get people involved and to pressure our government to change. Because with the international media on it, I feel our government will feel even more like it has to do something about it.
But the World Cup and the Olympics help to put the spotlight on the government, don't they? Don't you think it's useful that you're hosting these events?
Well, it is in a way, but the problem is that I feel that the situations that we're dealing with, the lack of health, the lack of education, and most of all, the violation of human rights, which is happening a lot with the people that are being removed from their houses, those are much more serious issues. So I think there's no point in keeping this beautiful image when, in fact, there's a lot of bad things going around, and I think it has to be stopped more than anything. So it's the truth, and it has to be said, it has to be shown so that we can do something about it and be better.
Well, Carla, you're in Los Angeles, Newton's in Sao Paulo. Bruno is with us from BBC Brazil here in the World's Newsroom. And Bruno, I'm curious, how much of your audience is entertaining the idea of boycotting the World Cup or actually advocating that Brazil is not the host?
Well, we've heard a little bit about that. Even here, where they had a bit of a copycat protest called in solidarity with those in Brazil, we've been hearing a little bit on that. But I'm not too sure people would go to that extent, really. I think it is a view of a small minority, really, but which is being, you've been hearing from that kind of talk in different parts of Brazil, in different protests, really. But I don't think it would go to that extent in any way.
Newton, will you be boycotting the World Cup?
Well, I wouldn't say boycotting. I would be I would be using a high criterion to see what I would support, what I would not support. To be honest, I believe it's a bit too late to say that we won't host the World Cup. We will. The stadiums are there. The money is already wasted. We overspend. We will. I won't boycott the World Cup. But I do agree with you, Ross, when you say that the World Cup can attract the eyes to Brazil. And I do agree with Carla that it's the right moment to show the world that we do a great country, we do have Carnival, but we also have serious issues that we wanted to talk about. So let's have the World Cup. It's too late to say we won't have the World Cup, but let's take the opportunity to discuss, to start to talk.
Exactly, yeah, and I completely agree. And it's also the idea of the video was not meant to boycott the World Cup necessarily. it was meant to get attention to issues that really have to be looked at. So especially because I'm not an activist, I'm not in Brazil politically active, so it's not up to me to say what we should do to make it better. But my intention was to bring that attention so that the groups that have already been working on it, for instance, the popular committees and the World Cup for Whom, those groups can gain strength from this international pressure. And I really, the boycotting was not even crossing my mind, because when I did the video, the protests were not even happening. So of course, people interpreted it like that. But again, I think there are many possible solutions, but I'm not the one to say.
Thank you very much, Carla. Well, certainly lots of people have seen your video. Bruno, I've got one question for you, because a number of our viewers have raised the issue of inflation. Now, quite a lot of us don't know a great deal about Brazilian inflation. Why is this such an issue now?
Well, it's a big issue because during the 80s and the 90s, Brazil had an absurd inflation that reached the thousands. So, and now the inflation is at a rate which is a bit worrying, which is 6%, nothing compared to that of those days, but still something that is believed could have caused President Dilma Rousseff's popularity to decline. There was a poll issued a little bit before these protests broke out that showed that her popularity had decreased by some 8 points. We don't know if these protests will make it decrease even more, or if it will have no effect whatsoever. But the fact is that inflation is a big cause of concern amongst almost all Brazilians, because it eats away on their wages.
Thank you very much indeed. I can see comments talking about that from Thailand. Ricardo in Brazil also raised the issue of inflation. So, Bruno, thank you very much for explaining that. I can see comments here from Eric in Nairobi. Let's take a quick break here on the BBC. Actually, before that, let's have a look at it. My worry is that this may go on and hinder their preparations as the World Cup approaches. I think we need to have a second option host. Well, I'm pretty sure I'd eat my tablet computer if Brazil isn't the host of next year's World Cup, but maybe that's a possibility. Maybe FIFA does need to think about an alternative. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of minutes' time.
No, I actually talking about it. Let me say something. No, I actually talking about it. Let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're connecting Brazilians all around the world who are talking about these extraordinary protests that we've seen on the streets of 100 Brazilian cities. Now, Mariana is from Brasilia, but she's live with us in London. Frederico's live from Brazil. And let's also speak to Pedro, who's a Brazilian living in Dublin. How are you feeling about what's happening in your country as you watch from afar, Pedro?
Well, I feel that this is long overdue. I am, if I have to choose in between what was, the situation of Brazilians before this and now with this, this widespread civic movement, I have to say that this is better than the apathic and I would say complacent position that Brazilians have been through for decades of just, I would say, debacle and mockery by the political elite. And political elite, I say without any political, I have no political affiliation in Brazil when I say that. I just believe that we had enough. I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say about that, actually, about if anybody here still believes in any kind of a political party in Brazil and how they feel about them.
Well, Frederico, is there a political party who you support?
The Green Party. I really like the Green Party, and I don't believe that we can afford to say that we don't believe in parties and or to not to vote, because if we do so, we will be saying goodbye to our democracy. As I said before, we need to believe in it. When we say that we live in a democracy, it means that we have, yes, the power through our representatives. So we need to believe in them, and if they're not doing their job, well, we need new representatives. It's not about the Messiah, it's not about Lula, it's not about Jesus Christ. We need new people, new thinkers, new politicians, a new class. That's my point of view, at least.
Pedro?
jump in just quickly. I feel sometimes that, yes, I think Brazilians are, I think that I have to agree with what the ambassador of Brazil said in the UK. Brazilians are a happy people. They are quite optimistic, considering other circumstances. But sometimes I feel like a Brazilian that is when voting for politicians, we have to, it's like choosing manure and which one smells the least, That's the way it feels, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
Mariana, let's bring you in here. There's so much anger towards the political class, but that can't be changed overnight. So how should those of you who support the protests go forward now?
Well, first, stop the PEC 37 amendment. We will treat people fighting for democracy treated as terrorists, something that hasn't been raised yet in the program. I think that's the first, to see the population that have the right to say what they feel. The clash of the World Cup with the elections in Brazil is also a very strong point, because it kind of takes the attention a bit. So I think being Brazilian abroad, I can only be scared for my friends in Brazil at this moment to be treated so violently and be picked on, the 1% that is doing something against the monuments to represent the majority that is trying to make a difference.
I agree with Mariana, actually. I was heartbroken this morning when I saw the news of vandalism in Rio. I mean, I'm from Rio, and it hurts me to know that there are people out there who believe that violence, looting, and depredation of public property would add any value to the civic cause. I mean, money that should be used for education, health, and security will have to be used instead to repair the damage. And now we're hearing about people throwing rocks at FIFA delegation vehicles and trying to invade the hotels where they're staying. This is absurd. I do not personally want the World Cup to be canceled, right? It will be a disaster for the country if it comes to that, not only to its image, but financially as well. I think that we have here an opportunity to tell Brazilian government and FIFA that we are being they are being closely watched by us now, and we want the profits of these events to be used for what it really matters, right? Health, education, and security. And we had enough of politicians stealing our money.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Pedro. And as you were talking, I can just see up on the screen here, Alberto's joining us. He Skyped us. He's been watching live in Israel. Alberto, I'm hoping you can hear us. Give us your perspective on the protests.
Hi. So I think the protests are a very nice thing to be happening at this time. So Brazilians can get visibility and can really express themselves about what's going on there, right? It's just a shame how politicians in Brazil do things for ages. It's not something new. It's actually a shame that Brazilians didn't do that before. But still, I don't think it's the time, or I don't think it's right actually to cancel the World Cup or something like that. First of all, I don't think that's going to happen. It's too much money already. You know, people got loans to build all those stadiums. So I don't think that the World Cup is not going to happen. And I don't think that is right, because most of the Brazilians, they never flew abroad. They don't have the opportunity to go to a World Cup anywhere ever. And that's the lifetime opportunity. And
I'm going to jump in here, Alberto, just because we're right up on the end of the program. But thank you very much for getting in touch. Thanks to Pedro, Mariana, and Frederico. Well, we don't know what's going to happen in the long term. In the short term, we do know that the president of Brazil will be speaking in the next couple of hours. You'll hear what she has to say here on BBC World News. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Let me say something.